mind of someone going through dementia.
Oh, I guess we're starting.
We
Daniel.
are. That was like
Thank
such
you.
a good. That was such a good thing. Why didn't you let me put that in the event, Daniel? Oi,
Oh,
making my job harder than necessary. All the compliments right up. That was lovely.
thank you.
Oh,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Daniel. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Hi, folks. Good evening. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. We're just letting everyone load into Zoom and get their audios appropriate and all that jazz. Make sure the mics are working and such. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I love watching the participant numbers go up. It's like getting in a plane and just kind of like, escalating. It's very nice.
Oh, I can see that too. I wish I didn't know initially that I could, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I was not trying for that.
no, it's fine.
Bottom of the screen. I have to look at it. You can look
Yeah,
at other better things.
There are things that we can see.
Yeah, each other's
Can I see
faces.
things? Oh, faces. Oh, participants.
Oh yeah, at the
We got
very
people.
bottom is the participant number if you want to look at it.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jackie from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Hannah Lillith Assadi, launching her new book, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells. She will be talking with Daniel Magariel, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Hannah, Daniel, and to the team at Riverhead Books for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're so grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat. You can find the chat by clicking on the icon that looks like a single speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with your fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two dialoguing speech balloons. My fingers still don't look like speech balloons, but I always do this when I explain that part. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered later on in the program. And I'll remind you in the chat about 10 minutes before we get to that point, so that you can come up with your best questions. And importantly, tonight's featured book, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Avenue stores, where you can purchase Hannah's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat in a moment. As thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. You can enter the code I'll put in the chat as well as a coupon discount at checkout for 10% off. And if you care about supporting the careers of authors like Hannah and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores like Greenlight, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. So this evening, our interviewer tonight is Daniel Magariel. His first novel, One of the Boys, was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a best book of 2017 in a number of publications, and a finalist for the Lucien Barriere Prize. His second novel is Walk the Darkness Down, forthcoming from Bloomsbury, USA in 2023. He has a BA from Columbia, as well as an MFA from Syracuse University, where he was a Cornelia Carhart Fellow, and he teaches at Columbia University. Daniel will be speaking with our featured author this evening, Hannah Lillith Assadi. Assadi teaches fiction at the Columbia University School of the Arts. Her first novel, Sonora, received the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and was a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize for Debut Fiction. In 2018, she was named a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She lives with her family in Brooklyn, New York. In Hannah's new book, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells, an elderly woman confronts a lifetime of secrets and betrayal through the scrim of fading memory under the mysterious skies of her island home. It was described by Kirkus Review as a haunting elegy for loss, desire, and memory, and by author Claire Vaye Watkins as a prophetic fever dream sprung from a singular imagination. Hannah is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be speaking with Daniel, and then finally with all of you. So please take it away, Hannah. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you. Before I read, I just want to thank Greenlight for hosting us. Also to thank the Riverhead team for setting this all up, and to Daniel thank you to Daniel for speaking with me tonight. We've been friends since our fiction workshop, or was it nonfiction undergrad? So it's really nice to be with him tonight. So I'm just gonna read, it's about midway through the book, just for a little bit. And at this point, Elle, the narrator, is already exhibiting quite a few signs of sort of memory loss, but also, as you've heard in descriptions of the book, these sort of visionary type episodes where she's seeing these lights and she's having these dreams. So in this scene, she kind of wanders off the beach and has a sort of dreamlike experience, and then comes back, and her husband Simon and son Raymond are waiting for her, and she's very disoriented. So that's kind of the context, but I'll read to you from that. Okay. No, I was never in the Ponzit, I say into the dark. Simon is gone. The wind has lifted the aged magazine from the bed, its pages now splayed open to an advertisement for Camel cigarettes. Nothing else from that past remains. Not the Neponsit house, not Gabriel, hardly my husband or me. I want it all back. I want a hot dog from Coney Island. I want to look in the mirror and find my body shining, blemishes of youth across the chin and cheeks. I want to smoke and to drink and to make love and to smoke again. I want to want. But time has no further reservations of desire for me. Life diminishes our breath until we are but the size of a grave, and then less than that. I shake Nina to get her to look at me, but her tired eyes just blink flirtatiously and then close. I cannot tell if we are deep in summer or already in fall. The fog presses against the windows, making the island as gauzy as the blind dream. Perhaps the seasons are on the brink of ending completely to make way for a fifth time of year, one when the sky and the sea no longer have a barrier. Since no one is here to mind my coming or going, I leave for a walk. There is no moon. Indeed, it is like that fifth season, the one that will draw the next world into our own. There is lightning in the clouds, a bonfire gathering in the heavens. When I'm halfway across the lawn, the house disappears completely. I rest in the beach chair. The sound of the sea draws me into the diaphanous world of sleep, then back to the long drive before our home. But at the door inviting me in are two old ladies I've never seen before. Inside, the house is in a marvelous state of disrepair. The staircase is slumped, the fixtures droop from the ceiling. The lights in the chandeliers are either dimmed or fully blown out. Dust clings to everything. The house is stripped of furniture except for a single room I've never seen before, furnished with nothing but a bed I'm informed will be my own. The ladies say, "We're happy you're here. Welcome, welcome." I glance out of one of the windows and expect to find the ocean again, but instead the oak trees are afire. Their branches grow flames rather than leaves. Black smoke subsumes the sky. When the ladies notice my eyes wandering out onto the destruction, they draw close to me and ceremoniously shut the blinds. "Where am I?" I ask them. "You've always lived here," they say. Dawn rises over the sea. The last streaks of night and its parade of stars fade in the west. Day emerges again. All possible shades of pink and purple reflect off the water. I look back at the woods with the fear of my dream that everything is on fire. But instead of fire, I see again that blue voltage shimmering through the branches, traveling into the sky, pulsing and luminescent. Then, walking along the coast, beneath umbrellas of a very different era, are the two ladies from my dream. They pause before me and look up at me in the chair. One carries a red picnic basket. For a second, I stare across the sand at myself, then at Ethel. I close my eyes again and open them, and two wild horses have taken our place. I quit the scene fast as an old lady can, not quite running, but not walking either. Back in our driveway, I'm relieved that our house remains. Simon and Raymond are in the car. Where have you been? Simon screams when he sees me. Looking down, I realize I'm still in a nightgown. I hunt quickly for a proper sounding excuse. I was walking to Tilly's, I say. Tilly's is gone, Elle. It's been gone for many, many years. Simon looks at Raymond meaningfully. I know that, I say with a shudder. I knew it was gone. I just wanted to see what it had become. I had this dream, I start to say. We're not doing this with you today, Simon says. Get in the car. We're already late. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. That was gorgeous. I want to just start by saying congratulations, and to tell you that I finished this book today breathlessly, just absolutely just swept up and seduced by it, and I couldn't find my way back to my own writing desk for envy of how gorgeous it is. But it's not just the lyricism, which is sort of like a defining feature of your writing, the music, but it's also incredibly propulsive too, because the mystery that's going on in the story and all the sort of the sub narratives that we're going back to. And I just feel like that's just such a magical and elusive combo to write something that is both lyrical and propulsive. And sort of thinking about books like that have that combo. And also, I guess there were two books that I thought of as I was like reading yours that really, you know, that sort of drew up as influences my own sort of private library. And the first one was The Great Gatsby. And it's, yes, propulsive, yes, lyrical, but also it has this focus on the American dream, which your book certainly is sort of trying to wrangle. And especially the question of like, who has access to it? Elle is married off to a rich man, Simon, and her father says he's giving her the American dream. Simon spoils his family's wealth and in search of like more wealth. Even Gabriel, her lover, who she like brings with her down to this magical island in Georgia with Simon, he even laments that like prohibition is over and there's no way for him to make a quick buck. And I guess, I don't know, when thinking about writing it, were you thinking about Gatsby? I think an argument could be made that like this is Gatsby told from Daisy's perspective. I think that's a really, that's one of my takeaways.
Gatsby told from Daisy's perspective. Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in particular. I do feel like ever since I read The Great Gatsby, which was actually late, embarrassingly late, I didn't read it in high school, which is crazy, but ever since I did read it, I was like, oh, this is just the perfect book, you know? And when I finished it, I threw it against my wall in this small studio I was living in at the time. And I still feel that way. And I've read it over and over again. And I think it's because of that Fitzgerald's lyricism matched with that propulsive way. I mean, that narrative, you can't put it down. And also, I feel like I can open a page of Gatsby now and I still feel moved by what's happening. In terms of this story being told from Daisy's perspective, I think it's really an interesting interpretation. Of course, I want to feel that Elle has more integrity and isn't so defined by money in the way that Daisy is, right? But she does betray Gabriel and she does betray what they had in a way. She feels like she's left with no choice, which is sort of, I think, what we all do. Like we betray the child in us because we betray our like maybe purest selves because we feel like we have no choice. Like life starts to just, you know, bring more and more limitations to what we can do, right? So in that sense, I feel like she's more like everyone than Daisy, but of course Daisy is also put in this kind of impossible situation that not many people talk about. You know, she was a mother, right? And she was already married, and it's really interesting to me that in Gatsby no one talks about Daisy being a mother and like that she would have to leave her daughter to be with Gatsby, right? So in some ways, like the similarity is definitely there, but certainly in terms of what I was thinking, just more in the larger sense of the American dream, I feel like though this book is being, talked about, it is a love story, it's a romance, certainly, and it's also about a woman with, dementia or Alzheimer's that begins to see into this sort of magical realm, but it's also very much about money. This book, and the gems, to some are just a symbol of money and about being able to rise in status, right, to be able to attain that American dream, and how empty is the American dream, or how elusive or how fatal at times, so definitely, yeah, I mean, I was certainly influenced by Gatsby, but I tried at least to speak to those themes.
Well, you did so beautifully. And I guess I want to give a little context about the gems. They're this sort of blue, elusive, sort of like diamonds that exist beneath the water off the coast, and people can see them, but they can't get them. And so there's this whole sort of like rush of people, of Simon specifically, and the Clarks beforehand, trying to mine them and to monetize them, because it's just this, it's almost like the symbol for like the easy wealth, and it's that just constantly sort of falls through the fingers, and actually leads to sort of the demise of several characters, including basically both of the men in Elle's life, Simon and her true love, Gabriel. So, and you mentioned Elle's dementia, and of course, this is very much a book about sort of the loss of memory and the way that, Elle is trying to sort of stitch her experiences back into sort of the present and the past, and trying to understand both who she is and the sort of the deterioration that she's suffering through. And in that way, I found one of the most enviable parts of your book, the way that you worked the structure, and that I felt like we were always a little bit disoriented, the way that Elle was as she moves between memory, but also, again, we were understanding sort of how, when you're in the mind of this first person narrator, how she might try to make sense of the world through frustration, anger, coyness, sadness, memory. And I don't know, did you do research for this book in terms of dementia? And how did you sort of like approach, I guess, that daunting challenge? And also, I think in my mind, the most just like, again, enviably successful part of this book is how you did that.
Thank you. I did, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and I've always sort of fascinated and saddened by stories that I heard about her, and I was too young to ever really know her. She died when I was about 2 years old. But certainly the genesis of this book was, I think one visit to my great aunt, who has since passed away, but talking about my grandmother just forgetting what to do with her cup of tea, and I was just, incredible that the mind can do that, that can lose that, right? But I did do a bit of research, not extensively. I feel like, as you can tell, like I'm not I don't think in either novel that I've written, I'm a research intensive novelist, but I certainly did some, basic research about sort of the way in which, how things are more difficult at sunset and sunrise, which is interesting, right? Like these sort of liminal times of day. And also just, I think, something that is pretty common knowledge about this disease, that like the past is so much more vibrant oftentimes, right? Versus the present, like that, the long-term memories still are intact compared to the short-term memories. And I find that, it's obviously awful, right? It's an awful disease. It's also fascinating that, because it sort of mimics even the way we all of our memories really are. I mean, I was having a conversation with my friend Elena the other day, and it's like the formative memories of our lives actually occur in these, like, sometimes in these very short spans of time when we're very young. And then a lot of life is like survival, and it's beautiful and there are beautiful moments, but they don't have that like shine, right? And I think so in some ways, for the way that I've written it, was meant to just sort of mimic actually the way even I feel, like, as a kind of not quite middle age or middle age, like that, these formative times are kind of not past me, but they, things don't shine quite that way as they did, when I was younger. And of course, there's a different shine and all that. I don't want to say everything's over, but that is kind of the way memory works, right? Even without a disease like Alzheimer's or dementia. So I wanted to somehow put that down on the page, but just formally, I feel like, just fundamentally, she's an unreliable narrator who's having a certain perception of the world that becomes somewhat dreamlike and maybe visionary, but maybe she's just mad and maybe she's been depressed her whole life, like it could be either of these things, which I'm really interested in. And also, like, really the only way reality enters the page for the reader is through the dialogue of, what she hears from other people, which we don't even know that we can trust either, right? But yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question.
No,
But
it does. It does. I'm going to ask kind of a follow-up that might be a little redundant, because you mentioned the unreliability of Elle, but and I feel like, especially, we both teach at Columbia, we're both doing workshops, and the question of sort of the unreliable first-person narrator is like, well, yeah, every first person is unreliable. It's a subjective sort of telling of one's own story, right?
yeah,
And so but what fascinated me about your book, and again, what I admired about it, is that it doesn't bother itself with that question. It's so much more interested and focused on sort of like on what personal truth the subjective mind is capable of articulating. And so even though, yeah, we have reason to question every single thing we're told in this book, it still sparkles with truth, or with the search for truth. And I don't know, maybe you could talk about Elle's her sense or search for her own truth, and her sense and search of her own past and present. I know it's a really kind of like weird, amorphic question, but
no, I mean, I think you said it more beautifully than I could describe what I done. So thank you. I mean, I think what I was really interested in, right, is that, like, we're constantly, as artists or as people or as children becoming adults, like, I think Elle kind of relies a lot on children, right, like, and on childlike interpretations of the world. The whole, like, there's fairies here, right, that start to play a role and stuff like that. But anyways, like, our interpretation of the world just gets stamped on as we get older, right? And who's to say that that the way she's seeing isn't right? I think, and that's the thing. I think a lot of times also that when people grow old and they exhibit signs of dementia or memory loss, or we just tend to, like, discount them. We just tend to discount what they say. We don't listen to them. And who's also to say that something isn't like this isn't happening? Or oftentimes the near dead will say that they see somebody in the room, right? And, like, I want to believe that might actually be what they're seeing, and then they're not just going mad. And even if they are just losing their mind, that is what they're seeing, right? So that is their truth, and it's beautiful. So I think I just wanted to allow space for that to be possible in her world, and that's all you get as a reader. So you're kind of forced to go on this journey that maybe there are these blue lights taking over the island. The world of the gems is sort of finally usurping the world that has caused her to suffer so much. Maybe these are really this fairy world, right, that her daughter talked to her about. Maybe it's all real, at the end, that's what she gains as she's losing everything else. So in that way, I wanted to, like, it's a form of hope, right? even though it's
Well,
a very sad book, I guess.
it's
So,
also so beautiful, and full of hope and longing. And I guess one of the ways that I also to build on your point, one of the ways that I think you provide credibility for Elle in terms of this whatever unreliability, this search for meaning, is that she just sort of beyond like the lyricism of the prose, that's also so it brims with wisdom too in some of the lines. And I remember texting you this line a few days ago when I came across it, and I'm just going to read it aloud because I just think it's so great. I do not know if memory works like the planets and stars in space. The heavier a season, the more time slows around it. And you and I have also spoken about how, we each wrote our first book was a desert book and our second book was a sea book. But and when I read you though, I always see, yeah, sure, that's true with the setting, but your eye is always looking to the sky. And I don't know what mystery is up. Like the first book, there was like weird sort of alien lights, and this one, we're always looking at the
yeah.
stars falling. I mean, look at the title. I don't know, what is it about the mystery up there that sort of your characters use for guidance, or you that draws your eye there?
Sure. I mean, well, it's another landscape, right? It's just the one that we really can't get lost in any way, or unless you're an astronaut, which is not going to be the case for most of us, right? And it's just the first, I mean, I think it's the first sight of human wonder, right? It's where the ancients looked, right? It's something in our blood. We're always, we've always been looking up there, of course, until we live in cities like the one I'm in, New York City right now, where we can't see the stars. But we've been looking up as humans since the very beginning, sort of wired into us. I even think about this a lot too lately because like my phone, like I'm constantly looking, down, right? And the few times, we spent a year pretty much in the desert, and we went up, kind of in the high desert near the Grand Canyon one night, and the stars were just absolutely incredible. And I remember my neck hurting literally from looking up that much, because just my movement has become like this all the time, right? It's a really interesting fact of our existence now that we're just constantly attached to these screens. So maybe in my art, it's like just a place it's like, okay, well, here I can, be there, right? In a way. But certainly, place is just very important to me, as you said. And the desert dominated my first book, and the ocean my second. And the ocean is just this, like, yeah, I can look and look at it. I think it's been said more eloquently before me, right? But just that with the desert, at least during the daytime, you can see, right? There's a horizon and you can see into it. You can see the vegetation, or, you can see what's happening in the ocean. It's like, what's under there? You can't see. And so in that way, there is a way in which it sort of like has that deep space mystery. Anything could be happening. I don't know. Yeah.
Sense. I mean, it also sort of speaks to at least my preference for art is one, like if I walk away feeling sort of a renewed sense of wonderment in the world or curiosity, I feel like that's one of the greatest compliments I can give to something I read or watch or observe. And so I think that instinct is pure. And I guess as a follow-up, can we talk a little bit about Lyra? Maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit about this place where the novel is set, because it's so magical. And does it exist? Is it a real place? Because if so, I really want to go.
It's totally a real place, and it hasn't
Okay.
been, developed by every real estate shark in the world. No, I mean, I wanted to set my novel in the South. That is where my grandparents lived, and I wanted to be true to kind of that latitude and the politics and the history of the region, right? But also I wanted it to be on the ocean, and ended up kind of coming upon Cumberland Island, which is an island, a barrier beach island off the coast of Georgia. Mostly wilderness preserve, although that's being a little threatened at the moment, but mostly wilderness preserve for the past few decades, after the Carnegies had lived there. Kind of, they had their estate there from the late, in the late 19th century into the mid 20th, when it burned down, kind of famously. And anyways, ever since they mostly abandoned it, although they still have a hotel there and some properties there, but it's mostly wilderness. And it's amazing because it's just this sort of like, I guess it's hard, I think, especially on the eastern seaboard, to see that much wilderness just beside the ocean. It's sort of like, the live oak trees and the palmettos, and there's still wild horses that are
Wild
descendants.
horses? That's really, I
There
was waiting for you
are
to answer
still
that
wild horses
question.
that are descendants from, I assume, the Carnegie horses, right? But although who knows at this point. Anyway, so I camped there one very cold December with Jake, my partner, and it was just absolutely beautiful. It's beautiful, and it was only a few days. And it's interesting with my first book, speaking of place, I grew up in Arizona, and the desert was very much in my bones, and this was just a brief sort of spell, but it got to me. And then, Lyra, of course, in order to suit the book and what I wanted to do, I had to kind of create a place inspired by that island that, I didn't want to take on the Carnegies per se, but I did want to take on this wealth that has, or this sort of ghost of wealth, and that, these people keep trying to come and, build new wealth there, and it keeps failing. And why does the land not want it? The land or the people that were there, whatever it is, right? Like, so yeah, it's not a real place, but it does have, it was heavily inspired by Cumberland Island.
Makes sense. There's another part of the book that I found very intriguing, and it's in itself sort of a small love story, right? It's a small family, small island, but the novel sort of never neglects to situate us in the global. I mean, it's almost like Elle is always sort of telling us what's going on. I mean, the novel spans what, 60 years, or her memory, like, of her life, from when she grew up in New York City, and then and spent she moved to Lyra in 42, something like that, right before the U.S. got involved with the war. But we're always sort of checking in on what's going on. There's a suicide bomb in Jerusalem. There's a dolphin swimming in the Indian Ocean. I mean, we're always sort of moving around. And there was this line also that I actually earmarked, and it struck me because it's during the retelling of her, when she's remembering her wedding day, and she says, "It never did rain. The night I married Simon, there were billions of stars in the sky. In the coming years, millions of people would be shaved and stripped and gassed. And men would unleash a nightmare by splitting an atom in two. And the soul of the world would be forever desecrated beneath that blast. That day, Simon walked among our guests like a king." And why was it important for you to sort of not lose the scope of history going on at that, as we move through, and even to insert it almost almost aggressively in sort of the moment of her wedding?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. And I don't know how consciously I thought about it, or maybe it's just that that's the way that I receive the world, that on the one hand, the news, or news from the world, right? It's so heavy that it can break us, and it can break our stories, like the story that we're telling ourselves about our life as we just try to survive the planet, right? That it kind of, it is this loud and violent and insane interruption, and yet we can't really ingest it. We can't really do anything with it, because if we were to, you know, how would we go on? Yeah, so maybe that's just sort of, I mean, you know, again, like, I don't know how conscious, of course, I don't know how conscious I was of it necessarily as of it being such a, you know, present part of her consciousness other than that. But at the same time, I feel like she's also just moving through so much time, right? And she's disoriented about what's happening to her in her own life and how time could be moving so quickly, which is, I think, a lot of how we experience days and months and years. At a certain point, it just, things just fall into the next thing. And yet these very momentous events are happening, right? And it sort of keeps both her and the reader in the reality of like, that this is decade, you know, this was you know, this is decades ago. And then and how much changes, right? Because part of it is that she's clinging to a world that certainly is long gone, right? Which I think a lot of us do, or I certainly guilty of, right? And I think it's something that's very present when we listen to older people, you know, clinging to a world that's not here anymore, you know. So I think that's also part of the, yeah, the invasiveness of the kind of the news, that it's always on, it's always in the background, it feels somehow true, but, and yet, you know, what can she do about it?
I mean, it's a great answer. If these global events sort of function as an anchor into like the real world and situate the reader and Elle in terms of like, you know, what these sort of meta narratives that we all have as a part of our existence. Like, how does, I guess, the haunting that sort of also pervades the book, which is almost like it's like a counter influence to that anchor, because I mean, ghosts of the past loom so large in this book, and metaphorically, delusionally, and even, we don't know, perhaps magically. I don't know, I guess, can you talk a little bit about sort of the haunting that is in this book? Because I think it's probably an adjective that's going to be used frequently to describe stars.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I feel like there's two kind of like haunting threads. Like, one, there's the very real, like, realistic thread, right? Which is that she's getting sicker and sicker, and, you know, and has possibly battled and probably has battled this, you know, form of mental illness her entire life, right? Also that her husband's family money is completely gone, and he's, you know, the business is in ruin. The country is kind of like, there's questions about what's happening to the entire island, you know, the economy of the island. A lot of the business is gone, right? The Clarks are coming back with this sort of technology, this technology prospect that's sort of looming on the horizon, which I think, right, something we're all, as we're sitting here on Zoom, right, but also a technology that will replace many jobs, right? So and has. So that's going on, and that's one thread. And then there is the like ghostly thread, right? Like, there's just Gabriel, and there are other ghosts, as it were. There, you know, she's haunted at times by the memories of her parents. She's haunted, and it's very subtle. I don't know how many, you know, readers pick up, but by her future self, right? There's this sort of like future ghost potentially haunting her, right? So for her, you know, there's one thread of haunting where that's existing in time, again, as we all know it to be, and there's one in which time isn't operating, you know, like where the ghosts aren't operating in time the way we all do, right? And they're just recurring and appearing and coming back for, and not just for Elle, but also for Ethel, right?
Also, for Zelda too, her daughter. I mean, that's one of the most striking parts of the novel, because you think it's all in the mind, and then a little bit later, the daughter recounts this story of in which she believes that she encountered the ghost of Gabriel. And you know, the reader's jaw drops with L's at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And Zelda, of course, doesn't know anything about Gabriel. Also, the stories that Gabriel tells Elle at the beginning become kind of like they form her own haunting, right? So it's actually kind of stories themselves that are the haunting things, right? Because they populate her memory, right? These stories, and they become so beautiful to her that they become more real than the actual events of her life at the end, right? So it's also just about stories themselves, that they operate sort of also outside of time when they really stick to us, right? So like he sees the ghost in the graveyard in New York, he talks about the pond being full of fireflies, right? And this is all imagery that is repeated by her later.
Repeated over and over. All right, I have one more question before we jump into the Q&A. And it's kind of, it's a very serious question. And so I need a very serious answer.
Oh no, oh no, Daniel.
I'm personally vested in it. Hannah's been calling me Danny for 20 years, and tonight she has to call me Daniel over via Zoom. I think one of the greatest compliments you can give a stylist is this idea that you can flip open to any page without knowing who wrote the book or what book it is, and you can guess the author. Just the style is that distinct. And you have that. The music of your sentences sing in like in the Assadi voice. And I was wondering, how do we do that? How do those of us all aspiring to write sentences as beautifully as yours? I mean, how do you approach sentences? How do you sort of approach voice? And when you're writing, like when you're in the music, is it natural? Is it just like worked over and over again? Does it feel very organic and easy as the language seems to like imply?
Yeah,
that it comes easily to you.
Daniel's also quite the stylist himself here, Danny or Daniel, whatever I should call him. But I will just say, I think, it's funny. I think with this book, I actually wrote the first draft so quickly that usually language for me is like the primary, right? And but this just for whatever reason, the story kind of came out of me. Maybe because like in some way I feel like I wasn't writing it, I was like receiving it, because it wasn't, it's not autobiographical, it's not really, so I had to really come back and like tone the language, and which was different for me. I mean, Sonora was very much like sentence, like I was building a music. It was also in my language, it was the desert, it's like where I grew up, it has all of this stuff I know so deeply. And this book I didn't know as well. And so like the language I had to kind of get to know with revision, right? Also, I think though, really, I mean, yes, I hear, and this is maybe the part I can't really articulate, right? I think like I'm maybe just more of a poet by nature. So I have to, when I find a voice, and I know it's going to last, right? Like there is automatically a certain musicality to that voice that helps carry the language, I guess. But it's also place, right? Like I heavily rely on place. And I just need it. Like it feeds me, I feel like. And I think even going to this island for a few days just gave me, a lot. Like I feel like, some painters, right? Some visual artists require a scene. They can't just like invent it. I feel like me as a writer, I rely on, the outside world in specific places. And I do find that, having spent the year in the desert, it was like, I could not write about the desert in the same way as I did before, right? I would have to find a new approach. It's like also a place changes after you've maybe written about it too, or I've written about it too. So that's an interesting phenomenon.
Makes sense. So the takeaways for all of the students watching is sometimes it comes out the first draft, sometimes it comes out through revision, sometimes you got to go to the place and sometimes you have to sing your own place.
Yeah, but definitely always, no matter what, I mean, revision is all of
Revision.
the writing. And, every good teacher that told me that before I really understood that, I, didn't want to listen to, but I think Daniel and I both know this very well, right? That it's all in revision, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, years of it.
Yeah. Years and hundreds of
Years
drafts
and
and
years and years. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, speaking of teaching, we have a question
Okay.
from Jackie. It's has teaching fiction changed or impacted your revision process? How have your students taught you more about writing? You
Yeah.
don't have, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh,
If they have at all.
no. They certainly have. Teaching fiction has definitely taught me a lot about revision, right? Because I'm paying so much attention to just at every stage, at every paragraph, at every line of a student's work, I'm paying attention to function, right? And I think sometimes like that's the primary thing. Like I'll see, a detail or an image or a line that isn't contributing somehow to the overall plot of a story if the student's working in fiction, and I'll, mark it. And whereas I would let myself get away with that in my own fiction, like I'd be like, oh, but it's beautiful, and so why not? And I think the more I evolve as a writer, the more I really believe in killing your darlings. And that, I mean, and maybe the passage I read isn't the best evidence of that. Maybe I don't fully believe in it yet, but I do believe that for the most part, almost every word, right, should contribute to the greater whole somehow. And so that's something just from reading student work carefully that, I feel like has helped me as a writer. But in terms of my students, I mean, my students help me immensely. I feel like teaching is can feel, I mean, sometimes of course it's difficult, but sometimes it can feel almost like, spiritual work or something. And it's not just that, it's the conversations that we have, it's seeing a student find their material or find their voice, and it reminds me often of why I'm even sometimes when I feel like I don't know why I'm doing this.
I feel that way specifically,
Yeah.
going into these classrooms and having conversations with serious people trying to do serious things, we all care so much about that it almost feels exalted in a way. And I always walk away with sort of purpose renewed, like the raison d'etre of my life is still okay, right? I'm here and I want to work, and I'm ushered back to the desk, and there's an incredible sort of energy that happens when this conversation, when these conversations, I don't know, you spend 2 hours talking about a story. And we're all trying to take it apart with this sort of healthy envy and then put it back together with a certain astonishment. Yeah.
True.
I mean, I have another question for you. And it actually started your reading tonight. You mentioned, I think it was the fifth state, the fifth something. Do you remember what that was in the reading? It was specifically the fifth realm or fifth dimension.
Yeah, the fifth season. Yeah.
The fifth season. That's what it was. And in the part that I read about how of your work, where how we talked about life experience or memory as a season, and the book is organized in 5 parts, and the first 4 are seasons. It starts in, is it spring?
Yeah,
spring and spring, summer, fall, winter. And
then
the 5th section is untitled. My mind just sort of exploded into that emoji, where I'm just is that the 5th season you're describing, this other dimension or whatever? And can you talk a little bit about sort of the structure of the novel and how that relates to that? Speaking of every sentence, every word mattering to the larger whole, I feel like that passage you read speaks to the overall structure of the novel itself.
Yeah. So I mean, that was definitely very intentional. There is the yeah, there is a book, a famous book called The Season by N.K. Jemisin, but that wasn't
Yes.
necessarily why I put that here. It wasn't an illusion, although maybe it should have been. I think in that fifth part of the book, you know, the structural intention, right, is that she's defined by time. Like, this is a character that is sort of, you know, consumed by what she's lost to time, right? And so she's, you know, she's in time, she's following the seasons as she's, you know, as she's dying, right? But this last section, she's departing from time as we know it. Time is a flow that, you know, follows seasons. And yeah, she's sort of leaving time and space, right? And maybe she's just dying, or maybe she's going to the blue fairy world. I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely a sort of to imitate what's happening to her.
Very cool. Trippy.
Yeah, I guess it's trippy.
It's amazing.
Okay,
all right,
good.
I have a question from Alita.
Oh, Alita.
Yeah. Hi, Hannah. When did you know you wanted to be a writer? Was your childhood filled with books? And remember, your parents are watching this, so.
Yeah, so it's all because of them. I'm no, thank you. Alita's one of my students, so it's nice to get a question from her. Yeah, I really love to read, and my childhood was full of books, and my parents did very much encourage my, early literary evolution. I think I always remember my dad telling me that, I don't even really remember, but I would write stories when I would get home from elementary school, where I would kind of like lie about what happened and lie to him about certain things. Like, I would just always be making up these stories. So I don't know consciously that I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I was writing for sure. Little fictions, maybe a little bit problematic to them, but and then I remember finding this thing as we were cleaning out my parents' old house that was from, I don't know, first grade or second grade, where it was like, when I grow up, and it was, I want to be a writer, which is funny.
Really?
And yeah, or an astronaut. I said a writer or an astronaut.
So you wanted to look to the stars.
So there we go. That defines me. That's everything you need to know. And then, but Alita, more seriously, I think in high school, the moment I kind of point to is a teacher assigned like kind of a creative writing response to William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. And the exercise was to write a chapter from Caddy's perspective, who does not get a perspective in The Sound and the Fury. And I did, and that's when I knew. So that's the official response.
Great answer. I guess along those lines, like, what other books were you influenced by? Because I you could call this, I guess, a Southern Gothic, but also, like, I was always struck by so much of the romanticism that is in this book, the way that the world, like, is personified in this sort of magical way that speaks to your characters.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I'm influenced by the romantics. I mean, certainly Faulkner, as I said, was obviously a big influence. The Great Gatsby is a big influence, and Betty brought it up. The Brontes were a big influence, to go back a little bit, right, to the original Goths here. Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, I feel like that's another,
which
like,
you gave me years ago.
I did, yeah. Another kind of perfect book, and also propulsive and lyrical at once, and suspenseful, right? Super suspenseful. I don't know, so many books. Marguerite Duras was a big influence, sort of that spare poetic prose. There's a million people. You're a great influence, Daniel.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And I mean that seriously. And you've taught me a lot about being careful. I think sometimes I have these bursts, right? That it's important to be precise and careful. And we've grown up together.
Yeah, like, I think hesitation is like the best instinct a writer can have. Like, other people are like, just blast through the wall, just write. And I'm just like, no, caution, like, it's okay. It's okay to take a moment. It's okay to really think deeply about the next move. At least I hope it is.
Yeah.
I have more questions. We have a few
Okay,
more
yeah,
minutes.
I'm glad you're here to answer. Ask me more.
We have Shantez. How do you feel about getting through the grueling process of being a published author? What was the hardest part for you? It's such a wise question. The grueling process of being a published author.
Yeah, this is another student. Hi, Shay. How do I feel about it? Good question, especially tonight. No, I feel, listen, the hardest part was actually the best part, and I say this to my students, I think Shay has heard this probably a million times, but is the writing, right? It really is. I mean, it really, really, really is. And there's another really great part when a stranger writes you, or an old days comes up to you in a bookstore or at an event, and is moved by your work, and they have no reason to tell you that, right? That's another great part of it. Everything in between is like tough, it's tough. It's not easy, even if in the best case scenario, not that I've necessarily had that, but I don't think it's ever easy. I think it's hard. You're exposing yourself, you're exposing years of work and your dreams that you put into something. And all I can say is that you just have to believe in it and your vision. And that's it. That's all you got, right? The world's not going to give you more than, I mean, sometimes, but for the most part, you're alone with the page. So I don't know if that really answers the question. And I will just say, as like anecdotally, my first book was, was very difficult to sell. It was rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. And, my agent didn't give up, and I ended up with a great editor and house at the end of that story, but it was after much waiting and much grief. So you just really can't give up. That's all.
Like, you have to condition yourself to like not stomp away from the desk in frustration all the time. You sort of endure it with like hope, and work, and language. Some guy named Cal has a question for you.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
I love that. I love that your editor is asking you. It's such a great question too, and it's so nice to see like that process exists with an editor and a writer. We're still, after working so many years on a book, there's still so much curiosity that exists. That's beautiful. Cal writes, I'm fascinated by the relationship between Elle and her husband Simon, who cannot really participate in their marriage and is serially unfaithful, yet who is forgiven, or if not forgiven, at least understood in an unexpected and beautiful way by Elle near the end of the book. Did you have that ending in mind as you wrote, or did it surprise you?
Thank you, Cal. Hi. Thank you for being here. Good question. Great question. I feel like, yeah, Simon and Elle's relationship is super romantic in this like unconventional way, which is the case of so many long-term relationships, right? At a certain point, and it happens to be that he's queer and she's in love with this dead guy, and yet they've stuck by each other this whole time. I don't believe that, I knew all along the way that it would end, and that, that both that he would betray her so badly and that she would forgive him so much, right? Like, I don't think I actually knew how much loving would exist between them. But we kind of discover things about our characters as we write them. And the more I wrote into this book, the more I actually loved Simon and Elle's relationship so much. And it's the most real relationship that exists in the book. It's like they spend the most time together. And sure, they're not really sexually romantic or erotically in love, but they do love each other very deeply. So, yeah, I don't think I knew, but I think I discovered it.
Beautiful. One final question from Cynthia LaPlage.
Okay.
LaPlage. The word magic keeps being used to describe your writing, which feels very true. Does magic play a role in your actual writing process?
Oh, thank you, Cynthia. Jake would actually really like protest to me answering this.
He should probably answer this question about magic and the use of it. He hates when I use that word to describe my work. I feel like I found, but does magic play a role? I think like, I guess so, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, one thing that I always say that I find, this is a curious magical anecdote, that when I finished the first draft of this book, I don't know, my couch was on fire suddenly. Like, I left the room and I came back and there was a fire. Now, was that fire because, I don't know, like this draft was magical, or is it because I didn't put my cigarette out fully? Right? Like, because I was distracted and I was happy I'd finished this draft. Like, who knows? Like, is there magic? I hope so, but like, maybe it's all coincidence. That's how I'll answer that question.
Couch on fire. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, what a way to wrap up on a magic question. That's fully, I was like, oh, good, I'll let them go because that's a perfect image to leave with. Hope your couch ended up okay, or your apartment ended up okay. That couch.
Oh yeah. It was.
I'm glad things ended up all right.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that was a different cliffhanger than I was anticipating at the end of the event. Was the couch okay though? Did that,
the couch was a piece of shit. It was fine. Yeah.
Daniel and Hannah, what an incredibly exquisite evening. We're clumped over here during the reading, and the discussion has been so magical, but actually really inspiring and really wonderful. It's been lovely to see your community show up for questions and good thoughts. The chat you should scroll through later because it's just a lot of people loving on the work and both of you. So wonderful congratulations. We were so honored to host you for this release. Reminder, folks, that you can buy The Stars Are Not Yet Bells at Greenlight. The chat is the link is in the chat, and we hope to see you again next time that we have an event. And in the meantime, keep looking up and not only at your phones is one thing I took away from today. So thank you all.
Yeah, look up a little more. Yeah.
And Hannah, so much. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.